A year and a half ago, our garden looked like this. And it was all thanks to these delightful creatures. And in this video, I'm going to show you how we got rid of them, grew the grass back, and transformed this muddy nightmare into the garden of our dreams. There's been plenty of ups and downs, plenty of learning curves, and I'm so excited to share everything I've learned with you all. And show you the finished result, because not only has this garden taken almost 2 years to transform, but I've been promising you this video for almost 2 years. And I hope you enjoy watching it as much as I did making it. And honestly, I think you're going to be so shocked at what we managed to achieve. So originally, when I started Mission Get the Lawn Back, I didn't actually know what was causing our lack of grass. When we moved in, the grass was fine. It was a new build, so we were the first people ever to live here. And the fact that it's a new build is relevant, and I'll talk about that later on. But over the first few years of living here, the grass slowly dwindled to nothing. And at the time, we had 2 dogs, one who sadly passed away during the process of filming this. But I thought maybe it was caused by them going to the toilet on the lawn. Or maybe it was the constant trampling onto an already pretty waterlogged space. So my first attempt to grow the grass back was simply to level the ground, in the very amateur way you see here, put down loads of grass seed, the cheapest I could find, and then do my very best to keep both the kids and the dogs off it whilst it hopefully grew back. And by the way, during this entire process, I'm going to be showing you the timestamps just to give you a realistic idea of how long it all took. So as you can see here, I was using a squeegee that I'd impulse bought a few months before, actually to clean our living room rug. Never used it for that though, because it was a silly idea as we had no space to use it. And that's on me watching Too Much Mountain Rug Cleaning, the most satisfying videos. Anyway, I thought we may as well get some use out of it, so here we were. I was trying to kind of disturb the ground to make a softer, more inviting surface for the seeds to germinate. You'll find me doing this often at the beginning of the video, using random things I've found or got laying around the house to try and get a job done. Because I've always been a fan of making do with what you have if you possibly can, she says after talking about impulse buying a squeegee. But when you don't have a lot of money, which I didn't at the time, you have to be resourceful. Anyway, this particular patch of ground oscillated from being completely waterlogged, as I mentioned earlier, right into being so dry and barren it would actually crack. Rarely a middle ground. For such a small space, it's been incredibly high maintenance. And this is due to there being little to no drainage and barely any soil. Honestly, when I tried to dig into the ground when I first moved in, I found a sheet of netting under about 2 centimetres of soil, and then what looked to be concrete underneath that. So it wasn't at all conducive to healthy grass or just natural life, to be honest. So I added on a bag of compost and spread it around. And I knew that wouldn't really do too much, but it was that extra bit of fertile soil, and that could only help matters. At this point of the video, the garden was in one of its drier phases. Not the worst it's ever been by far, but before I put some seed down, I made sure to water everything thoroughly. Bear in mind at this point, I was still learning about how to apply seed and that you have to cover it up really. Up until this point, I'd say I attempted to grow the grass back at least 10 times and every time failed. And I always attributed that to the reasons I mentioned before and the birds eating a lot of the seed before it managed to take. But it turned out it wasn't birds at all. And we'll get into that in just a second. But here I am, attempting to cover the lawn on what turned out to be one of the windiest days of the year. And as you'll see in just a minute, the fabric I got was too thin and it got ripped out of the ground in seconds. Anyway, so around about this time, I started discussing my lack of grass on TikTok and my dreams to make it a lovely space for my children to play in. Because I felt so guilty that I had 2 little boys and a space outside that they could be playing, but it was just inhospitable. So I went into this whole thing determined my children were going to get the garden they deserved. So I was discussing the lack of grass on a TikTok video, and someone mentioned grubs. I think that's how it's pronounced. Basically, grubs that eat the roots of the grass. There goes the sheep. What a pointless endeavour that was. So of course, I went straight to the internet to look them up, and while I was doing that, the articles I was reading and the pictures I was being shown kept bringing up leather jackets too. Should I say Leatherjacketgrubs? And immediately I was like, those look like those caterpillar type grubs we've been finding on the garden path. I'd never seen them before or ever even heard about Leatherjacketgrubs up until this point. So even though we were finding loads of them, it didn't register to me that they might be the culprits. So I knew we had them, but I wanted to gauge just how many we actually had. So everywhere I read suggested that you soak the ground and then put tarpaulin over it, just like we're doing here. And this is theoretically meant to bring them to the surface. So we left it overnight and waited very patiently. So here I am the next morning, very optimistically expecting to see a decent amount. I was keeping everything crossed that this was the reason we couldn't grow the grass back. So I was really disheartened to find barely anything. I now know that this was because of the time of day I was looking for them. But at the time, it was pretty gutting. Here were that day's findings, about 3 Leatherjacketgrubs. And after that, I put the camera down and I didn't do anything in the garden for almost 2 weeks. But then, Charlie came home from the late shift one night and he came up to me and he said, "I can hear squelching in the garden." So I was like, "What do you mean?" And he said, "It sounds like the soil's moving." So off we went with our torches to thousands of Leatherjacketgrubs. You could just pick them off the top of the ground one by one. There was no tarpaulin needed at all. So for the next few nights, that's what we did. We went out with our torches and a tub and we just picked them out of the ground by hand. And at this point, there was really no denying this was the reason the grass wasn't growing. I think we went out grub picking every single night for a week, hoping that each time there'd be less and less, and there just wasn't. So we knew we needed to come up with a new plan. I'd been reading a lot about nematodes, which were a natural solution to Leatherjacketgrubs, but I felt really uncomfortable about putting them where my kids and my dogs played. So the next best thing was to borrow my auntie's chickens. As you can probably imagine, because of the time of day it was, they got even less leather jackets than me and Charlie. But the grass was slowly starting to grow, so our efforts had paid off a little bit. In the week or so prior to this, I'd been doing more research on nematodes and found that nematodes for leather jackets really were harmless to dogs and people. I still felt a bit squeamish about it though, because they're a parasite, but I knew that they were the only thing that were realistically going to rid us of the grubs. So here I was getting the garden prepped to put them down. And since this first application, I have used them religiously every few months. I use nematodes as a preventative measure now, and I'll probably continue to do so. And it's because I've since found out that new build gardens are highly susceptible to them. And that's due to their terrible drainage and the fact that crane flies, or daddy longlegs, which are the adult form of Leatherjacketgrubs, absolutely love a soggy lawn. Anyway, 10 days after that first leather jacket application, I decided to give the grass seeds another go. This time I used the variety that had the topsoil mixed in, because I thought that'd be handy for germination, but I also used another box of grass seed just by itself, because I just thought, why not? The birds are going to eat a lot of them, I want to give it the best chance. On top of that, I got some little barriers to remind us all not to walk on the lawn during that time. Because if you've gotten to know me and my family at all these past few years, you'll know that we're all quite spacey and we live in our own worlds a lot of the time, so we need a lot of reminders. And a visual reminder like this felt like the best way. Even though we could all just walk straight over it, dogs and baby included, it would at least make us stop and think. We also started taking the dogs into the street outside our house if they needed to wee in between walks, rather than just opening the back door and letting them out into the garden every time. Which was super time consuming, but I figured there are some dog owners that don't even have a back garden to let them out into when they need a wee. And if they can make the extra effort to get their lead on and take them out each time, so can I. After a week of being extra consistent with watering and not stepping over the barrier, we left for Cornwall for a week for a big family holiday. And it turned out to be one of the most heartbreaking experiences of my life. We left with 2 dogs and only came back with 1. And I don't want to upset you with the details, but suffice it to say, I did not come back with the same enthusiasm for the garden as I'd left with. And almost a month went by. When I did manage to rally my spirits, there was more grass in the garden than I'd seen for a good few years, as you can see here. Some large bold patches in parts, but overall, such a huge difference, and such a positive sign that the nematodes were doing their job. Because it had gotten so long, I got out the strimmer, and you can see what I mean about the soil becoming dry and cracked on the parts where the grass hadn't grown. I'll show you a closer look at what I mean in a minute, but after I'd trimmed, I thoroughly watered the lawn again and sprinkled down some more grass seed and left it. There was a lot of waiting around at this stage, trying something, seeing what happened, and then trying to adjust our technique if that didn't work. Did you see what I mean there with that big grass-free patch? It was just rock solid. Anyway, 20 more days went by, and it was time to get the mower out and see whether that last seeding yielded any results. So far so good, the grass was looking so green and healthy. As you can see in the background, a lot went on behind the scenes in between times. We were in the middle of summer, so despite the garden not looking exactly how we wanted it, we had a little sandpit and a paddling pool for the boys, and everything just felt a lot more positive. It's amazing what a little patch of green can do for your mental health. As the base of the lawn was slowly revealed, we found that there were still quite a lot of patches. And I'd already come up with a plan for if that were the case. So my idea was just to completely rotivate the soil in those little areas and then mix it with compost. I say rotivate, didn't have a rotivator, I was going to be using a shovel. And this was one of the things that was so daunting for me. And I think one of the reasons a lot of people were telling me they didn't think I'd be able to grow the grass back, and a lot of people did tell me that. But it was that I didn't have the money for any fancy equipment or to hire a rotivator or someone to come in and lay new sheets of grass. I was told by multiple people, just get AstroTurf. And absolutely no hate towards people who do, but I didn't want that for my garden. I wanted real grass and a place for the worms to burrow and for my kids to feel real earth underneath their feet. We've become so detached from nature as a species, and it's just integral for our mental and physical health to try and bring as much of it back into our lives as we can. Even in a really built-up estate like this, with the tiniest little bit of land, we can still grow grass and we can still plant pollinators, and that's so important. So that was a non-negotiable for me. We were getting grass if it was the last thing I did. Even if it took nearly 2 years, like it has. So if you look into that left-hand corner behind me, you'll probably have noticed that I haven't been putting any effort into tending that bit of soil or putting any grass seed down there. And that's because I've envisioned a sandpit there for the longest time. Not the little plastic turtle sandpit we had, but a nice wooden one that fit really well into the space. Because the wall's curved round in that back corner, it's always been a real pain and really awkward to mow, when we had grass of course. And it's also the place in the garden that has the most shade. So on a really hot sunny day, the boys would be able to sit there and play without getting sunburnt. Because on the super hot days, there really isn't any shade or any place to hide from the sun in this garden. Anyway, fast forward around another month or so, and I decided it was finally time to finish painting this fence. I actually did start trying to paint it years back, but as a lot of you probably know, I am the queen of unfinished projects. I go into things with such passion and vigour and then I get distracted. That's life though, isn't it? Especially nowadays, even if you aren't a distractible person like me. We have so many commitments, work's full on, we have families we need to be spending time with, houses to keep on top of, and so many plates to juggle. So we aren't all able to go full pelt into a project like this for weeks on end until it's done, and get it done in quite a short space of time. Free time, finances and weather permitting, I probably could have got it done in a quarter of the time, but that just isn't realistic for the majority of us. And there's nothing wrong with just getting things done here and there when you can. And speaking of weather permitting, after this last session of painting, all it did was rain for the rest of the year. So we've skipped forward again, almost a year. And here you see my mum pulling the weeds out of this little pebbly area. Now, I have always detested this pebbly strip. Ike, who was practically a baby when I started this project, you'll see is a full-on toddler in these next clips, but he always used to spread the pebbles all over the path, bring them into the house, try to eat them. It was very stressful. So I'd originally intended to just fill it in, but then my mum suggested alpine strawberries. Apparently they love to grow in areas like that, and they produce these tiny little strawberries, and I thought, that's a cute idea, let's do it. So she brought 5 little strawberry plants along with her. Ike's the watering can man, bless him. And for those of you who don't know, my mum's a very talented gardener. She knows all about plants, how to grow your own food, when to plant things. And she's teaching my boys so much about how to forage and identify certain plants. They're always at her allotment eating peas and carrots straight out of the ground and picking berries off the bush. And that's a dream for any mum, I think, to see your mum imparting wisdom and such a reverence for nature. And now we're getting to the stage where we're ready to start planting things. She starts to feature quite heavily in this video. Now, let's look at what the lawn's looking like a year down the line. Are you sick of watching me mow yet? No, but every time I do, the grass looks different, doesn't it? And better. And I wanted to show that. When I first made the commitment to grow it back, I never dreamed it would look this good. To go from basically pure soil and hearing things squelching in the ground at night to this, I couldn't be happier, and I was so excited to start focusing on making the garden look like a garden now. I was having dreams of the sandpit and solar lights and lovely fragrant plants. And after all we'd gone through to get it to this point, I had no doubt in my mind I could make that dream a reality. This whole process has shown me just how much you can achieve when you put your mind to it, even if no one else believes in you. And even if you're doing it pretty much by yourself with not the best tools in the world, you can get it done bit by bit. And I love to say that. You know, I say that in all of my videos. And it's just so true. If this is the first video you've ever watched of mine, I actually don't usually make gardening videos. I post cleaning content where I'll body double and help other messy people like me get through some pretty overwhelming situations. And we'll work together and find different strategies that help people deal with mess and disorganisation. And I'll also occasionally clean for others who are struggling. But that's important for me to mention because I've always been a very distractible, disorganised and messy person. I often like to start new projects and I'll focus on them intensely for a few weeks. And then suddenly the obsession I had for that particular thing fades as quickly as it began. I've been a painter in many different mediums. I was going to start a soap making business. I was going to be a snail breeder at one point. A clothes maker, a writer, so many different things. But I've never seen anything through long term. And I really was sick of that. Because it makes you lose a lot of confidence and trust in yourself. These are what we call hyperfixations, by the way, and I'll probably go into that in more detail in another video. But this process, transforming the garden and creating YouTube videos, has taught me so much about myself and what I'm capable of. And I know a lot of people watching along are just like me in that respect, and so it'll mean a lot to see this. Anyway, what I was doing while I was rambling on there was using scissors to cut the edges of the lawn because the mower doesn't reach there and the strimmer doesn't get them very well. I've since learned there's a handheld strimmer for garden edges, so I'm going to get one of those. And I now have a weeding tool, and it took me a while to figure out how to use it properly. But I'm about to ruin the lawn a little bit, for good reason, because it was getting overrun by weeds. I'm not the biggest hater of weeds, they do their job, but they're a bit uncomfortable to walk on or sit on. What I would never do though is use any form of weed killer. Again, that's just personal preference, but I don't want to be putting that around where my kids and my dog play. It felt really counterproductive to be gouging chunks out of my lovely lawn, especially when this was the first time it actually looked healthy and verdant. It actually pained me a little bit to do this. But at this point, I was confident in my ability to grow grass back. I knew there was nothing preventing the grass growing back now. Because after all we went through with it, it is always in the back of your mind like, oh, what if it doesn't grow back again? But it was all for the greater good, and it meant that the grass wouldn't be competing for resources, which ultimately means an even healthier and hardier lawn long term. Because I don't want to have to be putting this much effort into my lawn consistently. So for me, it was about building healthy foundations and healing all of the destruction that the leather jackets caused. So after I did that, I just filled in the patches with some lawn fix. Ike was being a fantastic helper. Thank you. Does that look good to you?
Yeah.
Yes. That looks good to me. He's wanted to be so involved and gotten so stuck into all of the work and all of the little jobs we've been doing over the last few years. It's been lovely to see. Sometimes as parents, when you're trying to get projects or renovations or even just general housework done with kids around, it can leave you feeling really guilty because you feel like you're not being as present with them as you should be. But doing the kind of work I do and filming a lot of what goes on in the house day to day, you get to look at it from another angle and perspective and see just how much they actually get out of being helpful and being part of whatever makes the house run and function. I've said this before, but my eldest has a set chore for each day. And on Tuesdays, we fold the laundry together, and it's one of my favourite parts of that day. Because we just sit there and fold and match socks and chat. And we're getting the mundane stuff done that needs to be done, whilst also doing one of the most important things of each day, which is catching up and chatting and bonding. And I don't know, I hope they develop an association with kind of comfort and wholesomeness when it comes to tasks like this, mundane household stuff. And it gives them a love for these kind of tasks that I never developed. Years down the line, when Ike's working in the garden or building a bench in his own home, I hope it brings back memories of toddling around the garden and the smell of fresh cut grass or lavender and jasmine, and the hustle and bustle of family coming in and out to help with projects on a sunny day. Anyway, here I was clearing the space in the corner because my vision of a sandpit was about to become a reality. Ignore those Asda baskets, I do work there and they were taken back. But here's my mum and my stepdad. And my stepdad was here to help build the sandpit because I had no idea what I was doing. I'd found a really cool octagonal one and it fit perfectly into this space. Here my mum is just clearing the weeds. And I couldn't actually believe this was finally happening. Now, I'm really glad this project has taken such a long time. And that's because when I first picked up the camera at the start of this video, I was in a completely different position financially than I was at this point in the video. Throughout the second half of this video, you're going to see us building features and using tools I would never have been able to afford the year before. And this has become possible, honestly, all because of me deciding to take a leap and post on social media. Throughout the 2 years it's taken to transform this garden, this channel has grown so much. We've built such a lovely supportive community. And if it weren't for you guys watching these videos and coming back each time and being so encouraging, the second half of this video might have looked a lot different. And so I literally want to shower you with gratitude. Thank you for making my boys' summer. I couldn't have done this without you, so thank you. Here my stepdad was lining the edge of the lawn, so we had a clear boundary for where we could mow. Let's have a look. Oh yeah, lots of wormies. Wow.
Keep them safe, don't squeeze them too tight.
My parents have also helped tremendously in the completion of this garden. Most of the building and most of the planting was all down to them and their expertise and know-how. Whenever they had some time off work, they were here helping. And I'm so glad I was able to get it all on video, because what a lovely thing to look back on and show the boys later down the line. So this plastic sheet here is to go underneath the sandpit, just as a waterproof barrier. We also poured down another bag of compost just to soften the ground underneath, because the last thing we wanted to happen was the waterproof sheet get a puncture. As you can see, my mum and stepdad make a fabulous team. They do this kind of stuff often in their allotment and in their garden. So I had complete faith they knew what they were doing, and I just turned into a cameraman. And after all the work I'd put in over the last year, that was fine with me. So that was phase 1 of the sandpit completed, and now it was my job to paint it. And this wasn't just for aesthetic reasons, it was to protect the wood from the elements. A lot of people have taken issue with how grey everything turned out to be in this garden, because I've shown snippets of what the garden actually looks like in TikTok videos. And yeah, it is grey, but I've done it now, so it is what it is. There is one aspect of the garden that I do regret, and I'll tell you about that later. And you'll have to let me know what you think. I already feel like I know what the answer is though. Now, whilst I'm painting this, let me tell you all I know about Leatherjacketgrubs. Because I imagine a lot of you watching this will be having the same problem as we had, or may encounter it down the line. And it's always good to know how to treat it as quickly as possible and reduce the amount of damage to your garden. I'm lucky in the fact that we only had a tiny square of grass to deal with, but even then, the grass took almost 2 years to return to its former glory. I don't know if you noticed throughout the video, even despite us treating it and seeding it, there were still phases where it started to yellow and die off again. If you look around May 2024, when my mum was planting the alpine strawberries, the lawn had regressed pretty significantly. To be fair, I hadn't been giving it as much attention during the winter months. I cut back on the nematode treatments, I wasn't filling in the thinning patches with seed. And that really is the answer. You have to be consistent. Even during the months you're not using the garden much, even when it looks like your efforts aren't paying off, be consistent. Now, have you ever noticed at the end of summer, around September time, lots of daddy longlegs will just spring up in your house, seemingly out of nowhere? I don't know whether that's the same across the world, but definitely in England. The beginning of September is crane fly month here. And this is the time you really want to focus on the nematodes, because this is when they're laying eggs into the lawn. So double strength nematodes is recommended during this time. I'd also recommend it in springtime, around April I'd say, because that's when the larva or the grub will be doing most of its eating. Personally, like I said earlier on in the video, I'll put nematodes down every few months. And every time I start to see the lawn yellowing, I'll just whack some more down for good measure. Unfortunately, living where I live, this is just going to be an ongoing problem for me that I need to keep on top of. And this is going to be the same for a lot of other people, so what I'd hate to happen to you is you manage to get rid of the leather jackets and you think everything's all good now, and then September comes and your grass starts to die again and all of your hard work is essentially undone. I have read as well that the crane fly like to lay where they hatched themselves. So chances are the ones that did manage to hatch are going to come back to your lawn to have their babies. I've got a story about what happened to my neighbour that just shows how persistent these things can be, and I'll tell you that in a minute. But 10 days later, the sandpit was all painted and my mum and stepdad were back. As you can see, there was a bit of drizzle, but we were trying to not let the weather stop us. I didn't want the weather to put us off so much so that we had to wait another year to finish the garden. But thankfully, this year's weather was nothing like last year's. It was just torrential rain for weeks on end by August last year. So now the bottom of the sandpit was fixed on, it was time to add the sand. By this point, Ike had been asking every morning, the second he opened his eyes, "Is my sandpit ready? Is my sandpit ready?" And honestly, it's been one of the best purchases I've ever made. Before we sorted this corner out, he used to sit there for hours in the mud, just digging and looking for worms. And I was a bit apprehensive at first because I didn't know how he was going to react, especially with not being able to find bugs anymore, but turns out he just wants to dig. Anyway, so I've been very vocal on my social media about the leather jackets ever since we found out we had them. And last year my neighbour messaged me and she said, I think we had them. We just paid hundreds of pounds to have the whole garden re-turfed. So I was like, that's awful. It's obviously affecting a lot of other people on the estate. So I told her about nematodes and how I was growing mine back. And that was the end of that. Fast forward to the next summer, she shows me pictures of the lawn and they have pretty much eaten all of the new grass that she'd had put down. And this is what I mean about them coming back to lay where they hatched. Let me just interrupt myself here and say that my stepdad's now putting up some baskets for our strawberry plants and our little bee hotel. I want this garden to be a haven for bees and bugs, just not leather jackets. They've traumatised me. But back to my story. It just shows you can get new grass put down, but it doesn't guarantee anything. And it isn't a protection when you've had leather jackets already. Because one, they'll come back to lay again, like I said. And two, it doesn't really solve the problem with drainage, which is what attracted them in the first place. So absolutely, by all means, get new grass laid if you can afford it, or you don't have the time or patience to be sowing seeds and waiting around. Just make sure you're using nematodes in conjunction. Now, it was time to go plant shopping. Finally! I had a very specific vision when it came to which plants I wanted and where. So today we were looking for herbs to go in between the alpine strawberries, a red currant bush, a small fruit tree and some jasmine. And now you're going to get a glimpse of just what is underneath the fine layer of soil in this garden. My mum literally had to use a hammer and a screwdriver to break into the ground just to be able to plant the plants. It took hours as well. But anyway, I wanted the jasmine planted there, so hopefully it'll wrap around this little structure we've got. In a year or so, of course. I'm not expecting it to grow magically like Jack in the Beanstalk. But we're putting a bench near there and I thought it would be so lovely when the jasmine flowers to sit there and read and smell the smells. And I've always wanted the boys to be able to pick food from the garden, so we've also got a little plum tree as well. And when these things grow, they'll be able to provide a little bit more shade. And of course, it'll provide pollen for the insects. Standing here, watching my son play in his sandpit and the plants being planted and it all coming together, my heart felt like it could burst. I'd love to be able to go back in time and show this video to past me, who was in despair over the garden and feeling like an absolutely rubbish mum, to be honest. I know that's not true, by the way, but you know what mum guilt's like. But to show me then that this is what it looks like now, green and full of life, I don't think I'd have actually believed me. Anyway, so I had 2 of these big grey pots and I wanted one to be full of lavender and the other to be full of rosemary. And where that big storage box was in between them there, that's where the bench is going. So it's going to be a very fragrant place to sit. Here my mum's lining the plant pots for the strawberries. We've had a real issue with slugs eating our strawberries so far. At this point, Ike hadn't got to eat one of his strawberries. The slugs had always gotten to them first. And then when we raised them a bit higher off the ground, the slugs stopped eating them as much, but then they got eaten by the birds. So what we did in the end was, I found these kind of netted jewellery bags. So every time I saw a new strawberry growing, I just placed it in one of these bags and tied a little knot. And then the slugs couldn't get it and the birds couldn't get it and it actually had chance to ripen. But yeah, I'm all about having as many edible things growing in the garden as possible. That's why I wanted to have herbs mixed into the pebbles rather than flowers. I'm definitely more of a herbal person over a floral person. I wanted to be able to potter out into the garden and pick basil for our pasta sauces and sage for our stews, rosemary for our roast potatoes. That's something I'm really looking forward to as it gets a bit chillier. I also wanted things like lavender and lemon verbena and lemongrass to put in the bath with some Epsom salts after a hard day. Another great thing about rosemary is if you've ever suffered with hair loss for whatever reason, it's great for that. I've struggled really badly with postpartum hair loss. At one point, I looked like Cynthia, you know, Angelica's doll from the Rugrats. So I incorporate rosemary oil in my hair routine. And now I can actually pick some from my garden and make a rosemary hairspray. Rudy got home from school and found a really cool looking moth. But yeah, mint's also really good for hair growth too. So in this little pebbly patch, all together we've got thyme, lemon verbena, lemongrass, sage, mint. In the big pots we've got lavender and rosemary. And I also wanted to plant some basil, which I did later on. Now it's time for the penultimate mow. I promise you there's only one more mow after this. And here I was going to aerate the lawn and just do a little bit of lawn care. Because at this point we'd had the sandpit for around a month, a lot of sand had spilt out and been trampled just where the sandpit is. I'll show you what I mean in a second. But it had started to cover the grass, and after all the hard work I'd put into growing this lawn, I didn't want sand to be the reason it then starts to look patchy again. I also wasn't the biggest fan of these little corners, you know, where you can see the underlay. But I'd always had the plan to put the lavender pot on the top of it to kind of disguise it. I assume it's going to look more and more camouflaged as the plants start growing. I do hopefully want to give you an update video on how everything's growing next year. It'll be interesting to see how much the jasmine's grown and the plum tree, whether any of the herbs survive the winter. Anyway, so here I was just trying to neaten up the area. There was a straggly little bit of sheet that had been irritating me, so I got rid of that, trimmed the grass, and then tried to sweep away as much of the sand as I could. I was attempting to distribute it over a larger patch of the lawn, rather than it all being condensed into that one little area. And then, after I trimmed the edges with scissors again, I was going to put more grass seed down and then pause sandpit time for a week or so. And then for once it had grown back, I'd brought a little picnic blanket to put down every time the kids play in there. The idea being that I could scoop any sand up that had fallen out and just pour it straight back into the sandpit. Saves sand and protects the lawn. Now what I'm doing here is using an aeration tool, and this helps for a number of reasons. It oxygenates the soil, it helps water reach the roots, which is especially helpful when the soil becomes compact easily, like ours does. Remember when it was all dry and cracking? It can also help protect against weeds, and it breaks up thatch, which is like when the roots have all tangled together. As you can see, there's a load of sand at the bottom of this paddling pool. That's all thanks to Mr. Ike. And it had unfortunately got a puncture and I couldn't find the source. So we're recycling this water and giving the lawn a good drink. I moved the storage box into this corner in preparation for our new bench. And then I had some more things to plant. Believe it or not, I had originally bought this plant pot to have all of the herbs in it, but it turned out to be a lot smaller than I was expecting. And I'm really glad we decided to plant them into the pebbles because they are thriving now. And I'm not sure that would have been the case if they were in here. So my mum brought me a little bit of basil from her garden and I'm going to put that in the top. And she also brought me some of these beautiful white and pink daisy looking flowers. So I thought, why not put those into the little side bits? The garden did need more flowers. I plonked it on top of there for the time being, but that's not going to be its forever home. We're actually replacing that storage box with a much bigger one. So we're not only going to be able to fit the lawnmower in there, but the kids' bikes and things like that too. Because up until this point, they've just had to be out in the elements. It was either keep them in the house and keep tripping over them, or risk a little bit of rust. At this point, people had become aware that I'd planted herbs in here, and very kindly let me know that mint spreads like wildfire. But what I really didn't want to do was dig it up, so what I did was kind of dig a little barrier, with the intention of confining the mint to this one specific area. My stepdad kindly let me know that the roots will still grow under my makeshift barrier, but I can always trim it back, it's not a problem. It smells lovely and I want to keep it. I would like to note though that at the time of this voiceover, that entire section from the gate up until that brick I put there is now overrun with mint, but it hasn't crossed it yet, so I'm taking that as a win. And every time you open the gate and brush past it or accidentally tread on a bit, you get this glorious minty smell wafting through the air. Anyway, like I said, I'm using the water from the pool to give the lawn a good drink. Couldn't find my old squeegee from the start of this video, but I'm using my scrubbing brush that I use in a lot of my videos to kind of move the water along the grass. It has a squeegee on the end of it, so I thought, why not? And after I did that, I wanted to put some more grass seed down on the patches near the sandpit and just sprinkle some over the lawn to thicken it up a bit more. You'll have probably noticed there's a lot of repetition in this video. Lots of moments where I'm putting down grass seed. And it's because I wanted to show you just how much effort's been put into getting the lawn to the standard you're going to see at the end of this video. I've learned it really isn't just a case of throwing grass seed down once a year and then all you have to do is mow once a week and it looks great. It takes a lot of effort and consistency and it can be tedious. And that's the case even when you haven't had leather jacket grubs or drainage problems. If you want a lush lawn, you really have to pour love into it. Anyway, a week later, flowers were in bloom and berries were ripening. And I wish I could transport the smell of the jasmine through the screen to you. All of the new plants we had were just thriving, it was sunny, even the thyme got little flowers on it. And yeah, it just felt like all of our hard work was paying off. Fast forward 20 days to one of the most exciting parts of this garden transformation. I was finally in a position to be able to afford something I'd wanted in this garden for years. So my mum and stepdad were back to help build our new pergola. Pergola? I don't know how it's pronounced. I've just had a look on Google. Apparently it's pergola. Either way, it was a dream of mine to have one by the kitchen window, with a wisteria growing up it, hopefully down the line providing a bit of shade. And we could sit there and have our breakfast and barbecues under dappled light. I also wanted a honeysuckle there so that, again, we've got lovely smells being carried on the wind. At this point, there was not one visitor to my bee hotel, but I'm holding out hope for next year when the plants become more established. Charlie was here to help out too before he started work. I know he's not featured a lot in this video so far for saying he lives here too, but you know, everyone's done their bit to help it come to life, and I could not have done this without all of the people featured in this video. It's been a real team effort, and like I said, it's going to be so lovely to watch this back down the line, and for my boys to see how hard everyone worked to give them this garden. And Charlie's hard work started a little bit after this. Once the pergola was up, next task was to make a space to plant our wisteria. And you're going to see another example of just how terrible the ground was. I know this particular area was under slabs, but trust me when I say it was like this throughout the whole garden. As you see, my stepdad's having to use a drill to break up the ground again. Under the few layers of soil where the grass is now, it's just the same. And the only thing I could do without properly rotivating the lawn was to add layers of soil over time. You know, when I was spreading bags of compost and kind of mixing it with the soil that was already there, that's the only thing I could think of doing. And it really has seemed to do the trick. So please don't lose hope if your situation's the same as mine was, and you can't afford to get a rotavator in to break up the ground. It is possible to have a lovely lawn regardless. And there are different types of grass seed that thrives in different areas and climates and soil types. So you just have to do a little bit of research into that. Now here my stepdad's measuring the slab that's just been pulled up, because I wanted as little patio removed as possible. And he has a fancy tool that will cut through slabs. Look how cool this is. The noise was not pleasant at all though. But I knew if it wasn't put back down, Ike and Mushroom would ultimately start digging. I've already found a dog chew buried underneath the mint. And there were multiple occasions during this process that Mushroom dug up chunks of grass. I could have cried. You can't take your eyes off her for 2 seconds. I said this in another video, but my friends who don't have kids will sometimes moan about their pets and then they'll turn to me and they'll be like, oh, but I know it's harder for you with kids. And every time I'm like, nope, dogs are harder by far. You moan away. Anyway, here we go. I think that looks really neat. The next day, Charlie was tasked with building this bench. My dad had popped over for a visit, and this turned out to be a blooming nightmare. Nothing lined up correctly, some parts were missing, we had to make multiple visits to screw fix. We were here for hours. Just imagine, as you're watching this, the Laurel and Hardy theme tune. It was lucky my dad was here because I was really no help. All I could offer was anxious, impatient energy. Sprinkled some of that on my dad and Charlie to brighten their day. But at this point the garden was so close to being finished and I just wanted it to be done before the end of summer. I wanted to sit in the sun and read at least one book and have at least one barbecue. And you know what it's like in the UK? Weeks of rain could descend at any minute. The next day Charlie was still working on the bench because he had to wait for a specific kind of bolt. I also had to order some metal feet for the chair legs because one was missing, so you can see it's kind of uneven there. Never mind, eh? Then all that was left for that day was to pop the cushions on and tidy the space a little bit. I don't know how everything ended up piled up all over the grass, but as I clear up here, you'll see it starts to reveal a garden that actually feels like home. This is just how I imagined it at the start of 2023. Now it's time for the final mow of this video and the lawn reveal. Looks like it could be on the cover of the Stepford Wives magazine, doesn't it? I'm only joking. I know I'm tooting my own horn here, but I am so proud of myself. And I can't wait to show you the before and afters and all of the little finishing touches we added. Look at the grass when the sun hits it. I'm so happy. Because it was such a lovely day, we decided to take advantage of the sun, get the pool out, and actually sit and enjoy the garden for once. We've been spending so much time over the past few years getting jobs done or keeping off the lawn. It was a novel experience to actually sit and bask in it. It has been really guilt-inducing as well when it came to the kids and the dogs, even though it was ultimately for their benefit. But there were lots of times where we had to say no to getting the pool out or, like I said, getting in the sandpit. Or when the dogs didn't understand why they suddenly weren't allowed free rein in the garden. So yeah, it was lovely. I got myself an icy drink and a book and just chilled while the kids played. If you're wondering why I'm gagging here, it's because I cannot stand the feeling of sanding. But do you remember when I said earlier there was one decision I made that I regret? Painting this pergola. At this point, I'm completely baffled on how to pronounce it. My brain just doesn't want to say it the right way. But yeah, I look back now and I'm like, it looks so much nicer, its original colour. I was painting it to protect the wood as well, but I just think I wish I'd have chosen a more natural colour. Especially because there was already so much grey. I do agree with everybody saying it. Anyway, what do you think? Would you have left it? Anyway, it's too late now. I've done it, so I'm just going to embrace it, and it still looks good. My next plan for it was to hang some lights. I also wanted to put some of those, the solar disc lights in where the herbs were, in the pebbles and around the sandpit. I've always wanted a garden that's just as lovely at night time as it is in the day. At this point, my granddad had come round and was chatting my ear off all about the Olympics. I'm not the biggest fan of the Olympics. I do like the gymnastics. And I did have a phase where I was obsessed with sprinting and watching Sha'Carri Richardson and Shelley-Ann Fraser-Pryce on YouTube. And I even went out and started sprinting myself, which lasted for about a week. But anyway, despite that, I would talk about paint drying with my granddad. He is the cutest man ever. And it was nice to have some company while I got this done. It was absolutely boiling though. It was one of the hottest days of the year and I smelt like an absolute ferret after this. Charlie was actually meant to get these higher bits, but the heat had made him feel sick. And I didn't want to wait. It was so nearly August and that meant probably 1 month left of summer. So I got as much done as I could before it got too hot. Bear in mind, I'd started at about 8 a.m. and it was already ridiculously warm. By about 11 I had to throw in the towel. And then later that day, me and Mushroom played one of her favourite games, Catch the Water, which was a nice cool down for her because, as you can imagine, her fur absorbs all of the heat. The next morning I was up early again and back at it. Each beam needed 2 coats as well, so I was going over yesterday's work too. Luckily 2 was all it needed though. It's very good paint. Cuprinol's the brand if anyone was wondering. And no, I'm not sponsored by them, I just like the paint. And while I'm finishing this off, I just wanted to mention the sandpit, because I know someone will bring it up. But the sandpit is covered up with that little silver sheet you see there every evening, because if you weren't aware, neighbourhood cats love to use sandpits as litter trays. And you have to be really careful with that because cats can carry a parasite called toxoplasmosis. It can make you very poorly, especially if you have a weakened immune system. So always make sure to cover up your children's sandpits when they're not playing in them. I'm sure most people already know this, but it's important to share just in case. Anyway, another 2 weeks went by and my mum had come over to plant a honeysuckle that she'd dug out of her garden. Before she arrived, I wanted to cut back the alpine strawberries. These plants are determined to procreate and they sprout out these long roots within days. I hate them. They remind me of... Have you ever seen those videos where people are getting a parasite out of a praying mantis? Very niche, I know. But they dip their abdomens in water and all of these long black worms come out. It's so creepy and horrible, and I find those roots creepy and horrible too. Mum had moved 2 bricks out of the patio to plant the honeysuckle, and we found 2 leatherjacket grubs. And this was Ike's reaction. Are they?
Are they? They're
Are they though? Ike finds every single grub and insect very cute. And I'm not going to teach him to think differently. He can find leatherjacket grubs cute if he wants to. I want to do my best to nurture that love of all creatures in my boys, even the ones that most people find weird and ugly. And I know that sounds very hypocritical, seeing as I've just made a video all about how we got rid of our grubs. Thing is, even though they completely destroyed our lawn, I still found it very difficult to do that. It made me really sad. I don't like to do things like that unless it's absolutely necessary. I don't even like to harm fleas. It's not their fault that this is their method of survival, and it's all luck, isn't it? Whether you're born a human or a head louse. And I think it's important to be respectful of all living things. Anyway, I was intending to buy a honeysuckle from the garden centre, but my mum was insistent on the one from her garden because she said it had the best smell, and apparently not all honeysuckles smell the same. And then while she was here, she helped me put up our new lights. I was so excited. While she did that, I put the disc lights down. As you probably noticed, we hadn't built the new storage box at this point, so there was always bikes and toys laying around. And I didn't actually incorporate the building of that into this video, just because it's already so long as it is, but I'm sure you'll see it at some point in a future video. I had to kind of pierce the waterproof sheet here to put in some of the lights, but I thought it'd look really lovely lit up at the back. I'm going to show you some clips of what it all looked like at night in a second, but honestly, the camera does not do it justice. Here I'm just showing you a close-up of how we arranged them. Excuse my croaky voice, by the way. At this point, I've been doing this voiceover for 10 days straight, and I am tired. Here's how I positioned them behind the sandpit. And here's what it looks like all lit up at night. Like I said, the camera's not great at night, but I hope this gives you the gist. I am so incredibly happy with it. I did actually put some of those, the fairy lights that drape down like a curtain on that feature behind the bench. Structure. But after I'd done it, it felt really overkill, so I was like, no. Especially in the daytime, you could just see all of the wires and I wasn't happy with it. Sometimes less is more, isn't it? Okay, so we had one more thing to build. I say we, it was Charlie. Ike was there to help out and advise, as always. But here, we were building a picnic bench to go under the pergola. I thought a lovely wooden picnic bench would be better than a table and chairs. They rust after a while, don't they? So we'll see how we get on with this. Don't worry, I didn't paint it grey. There'll be no more grey today. If you've made it this far into the video, I just want to thank you so much again for making all of this possible for me and my family. And I hope I can continue to give back to you with my videos. I put a lot of heart and work into them, and it really is a dream and an honour to be able to do this. It means the world that you resonate and enjoy them. And I wish I was able to reply to everybody's comments, but just know I appreciate every single one of you. Ike using Charlie as a climbing frame? Standard. But yeah, I really hope you've learnt something from the video. But if that's not why you were watching, I hope you thoroughly enjoyed the transformation. I'm going to show you the befores and afters in a minute. And I'll be back with my regular house cleans very soon. I've got a new series on the way. Because the summer holidays really did a number on my house. So I'll be doing a video per room, focusing on getting everything back on track. And after that, it'll be decorating for Halloween again. Feels like just a few days ago I was doing my Halloween video. But we've got lots of fun things planned for that as well. I'll be doing another vlog type video there. So yeah, I hope to make up for my lack of posting in the next few months, because I know it's been a long time coming, this video. But it's because I was gathering and compiling almost 2 years worth of footage. And I wanted to make sure it was an enjoyable video, so please let me know what you think. So we were just deciding which way would look best. It was quite a tight squeeze, but we'd measured everything to the centimetre, and I was very impressed with that, because usually we get at least one thing wrong. Anyway, are you ready for the before and afters? So here we are. I cannot believe that this is what it used to look like. To go from that to this is a dream come true. Look at the grass! I'm so chuffed. In a minute, just before you go, I'm going to show you just how many daddy longlegs there are around this area in September. But yeah, what a dream to be able to come downstairs in the morning, step into the kitchen and open the back door to this. To be able to eat dinner outside with my family on a sunny day. I'm just completely thrilled, and I so hope you enjoyed watching.
I'm
just showing how many daddy longlegs there are just on this wall.
Mommy,